Bear with us 2 secs. Okay, thank you so much, Bola. So as mentioned, I'm the clinical lead for NEL, and one of the areas that has come up, not just from patient feedback, but from the GPs as well as some of the gaps that's been highlighted through various reports, is management of patients at the end of life, and particularly in relation to learning disabilities. So I thought it'd be a good idea to run a webinar and revisit some of those principles that may be slightly different to patients when dealing with patients with learning disabilities. And I hope you'd get a good flavor of that today. And of course, we've got the experts, Amit and Karina here, who will be doing majority of the work, and I'll sit back and listen as well. Next slide, please. So just to set the scene, I thought I'd just give you some facts here. And again, not surprisingly, some of these, but some may be surprising. So 1 in 50 patients have LD, and 1 in 4 have severe LD. Now, this is not learning difficulty. So learning difficulty would be people with dyspraxia or dyslexia. We are talking about intellectual disability rather than a difficulty. We also know that patients with LD are 3 times more likely to have premature death than general population. And of course, the big thing about health inequalities, and particularly at the end of life, it actually extends throughout their life for every care they receive, but actually particularly also at end of life. And that's been highlighted through various reports that we've had, the CPOL, the CQC, the LEDR report, which is the most recent report. If you are from, BAME and have LD, you've got double discrimination. We know that COVID absolutely loves to attack the patients with certain minority groups. And if you've got LD, then you've actually really, you've got a poor prognosis. The LEDR report that was published quite recently highlighted an issue around, and I'm sure you've seen it in the news, most of you, about the DNA decisions, DNA CPR decisions that were made for patients just because they had LD. And again, that itself morally feels wrong. You've got to make reasonable adjustments. You've got to look at the patient as a patient, not LD. It's a diagnosis they have. It's not what they are. When I started doing this work, actually, and I was quite embarrassed, and I'm now not embarrassed to say that I actually didn't know there was a learning disability NICE pathway that existed. And actually that pathway, when I read that, it brought home so many things that actually at the practice level we should be changing. So for people that haven't read, do go and read these, but there's also a really good document from NHS England that I've just put on there. It'll be well worth reading these documents, although I'm sure a lot of that would be covered by Amit and Karina as well. Next slide, please. Okay, I thought I'd just mention quickly, because at most of my sort of presentations, I would, when I'm doing for LDs, I would mention reasonable adjustments. And whilst we all are aware of things like, the hearing loops, the wheelchairs, etc., just have a slightly wider thinking about when you're dealing with patients with LD. Do they need longer appointments? Do they need to see the same person? Do they need to be, the information needs to be relayed in a certain way? Or do you need to give them, and have an understanding of how they relay the symptoms to you? So check with the carers. Are there digital flags on the system to say that the reasonable adjustments need to be made? So I thought I'd just put that out there just as a pointer for people to think about it. Next slide, please. Because I'm an educationalist, I have to put this down. It's the learning outcomes. I'm really hoping you would understand by the end of this presentation an approach to managing patients with LD, and also have questions about the local pathways and maybe some gaps, which Amit and I are quite happy to take back to the commissioners and see what else can be done. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Amit, who's our end of life lead, as Amit has said, for the next bit of presentation. But lovely to see you guys. I can see a lot of familiar faces here.
Thanks, Jyoti. I'll share my screen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Sharma. As mentioned, I'm one of the end-of-life lead for BHR, ICP, and also a GP in Barking and Dagenham. And as Jyoti said, nice to see a lot of familiar people in the chat or in this session. I would like to start with the vision, what we developed in 2019 as a 5-year strategy. And the vision for our BHR ICP was that we want to make sure that all people living in BHR area are supported and are able to actually get the good experience, a friend of life experience, and people are cared for in their preferred place of death. And as per our strategy, one of the two specific strategic aims I want to mention is that we want to ensure that each person approaching end of life is seen as an individual and ensure that each person gets their fair access to care. And specifically in our strategic objectives, we actually did address that we wanted to ensure specific groups like people with dementia or learning disabilities have had equally good end of life experience. So looking into that, I mean, all these objectives and aims and vision, I'm really thankful for Jyoti and the wider team for from the training hub to inviting us for this session today. So going forward, I would like to actually discuss some things about some facts and fundamentals about consent, which is quite important when we are thinking about any sort of advanced care plans and we're discussing sort of complex health issues or taking medical decisions. So no one can give consent on behalf of another adult. And it must be assumed that a person can give consent, that they can make their own decisions until unless proved otherwise. And it is the responsibility of the treatment provider to make sure that to make a decision about the person's care about the for the consent to the whether they consent to their treatment. And it's a criminal offense to treat a person who has the capacity and has not consented. One sec, sorry. So I just wanted to move this out. Okay, so next slide is about if just going forward with the consent thing. Everything possible must be done to help someone making their own decision. If it is decided that someone is unable to make a particular decision, it doesn't stop that person to make other decisions. And decision can be legally be made for someone thought to lack the capacity by a court or a deputy appointed by the court, or someone of the or the person has chosen somebody else to make the decision for them, like lasting power attorney, and also those involved in the care and the treatment of the person within the framework of a best interest as in the multidisciplinary meeting. So these are some facts we need to be thinking about when we're actually making decisions for our patients and our residents or clients. As Jyoti has already mentioned, that actually we always have to think about what regional adjustments might be needed for patients with learning disability or any other patients who might need more time and support in making their decisions for their finances, social, health, and so on and so forth. So as Jyoti just mentioned, that we might need to give them more time. We have to make sure that we give them all the annual health checks and care plans, including the advanced care plan if needed. Again, communication is the key. We need to make sure that we speak slowly, don't use any jargons, no difficult words getting used. We need to have one idea at a time, repeat if necessary, check their understanding. And as on the slide, Jyoti mentioned that we need to make sure that the information has been provided in the easy read format. For example, the patient registration, the appointment letters, the appointment cards, all those things need to be thought about when we have to address inequalities and the service we provide for learning disabled patients. I have actually included some examples which I've found out in few of the surgeries which they use, and of this and you could include, and if there are any other service provider, you can include in your services as well. For example, when you are actually registering your new patients, and if you have got any learning disability patients getting registered, make use of these photographs or the pictures for their name, for their address, and things like that. Also, it may be worthwhile at that point to asking what communication support they might need going forward. So and that will help you to actually deliver your service better. So whether they do lip reading, whether they need a language line, or whether they use a text phone, And even we can ask them how do they like the information to be given to them in a larger print or in an audio format, and how they would like to be contacted by letters and emails and phones. So it's maybe a good way of sort of devising our current sort of letters and things or the registration forms and actually adapt in our current service format. So what is the key enabler to deliver good quality care for end of life patients? And that is actually identifying them that they are who needs the palliative care support. So the identifying somebody who might need the end of life is the first step, and we can do it by asking about the surprise question, as a lot of people in this session will know that actually if when you're seeing a patient or when you're reviewing a patient, if you feel that if you ask a question to yourself, but would you be surprised to see that patient were not to be alive or they might die in next maybe a month or a few months, weeks or days, then that patient might be in the last phases of life and be coded as palliative care. So that could be something you can do to improve your palliative care register. So increase your coding of palliative care. And also in most of the London practices now can actually have early identification toolkit. This is a toolkit which can be embedded into the GP systems, for example, EMS or System 1, and GP surgeries can run it. This toolkit will tell you the patients you on your list size who have not been coded as palliative but might have palliative care issues, or might you want to review those notes and those patients to see whether they actually need that support. And once you know that these patients are definitely needing to be having included in your palliative care register, increase the coding. Once you have done the coding, once you know what your list palliative care register is, the next step for that would be to actually do MDT meetings, the multidisciplinary team meetings, or palliative care meetings, the GSF meetings. And you can rag date them with red, amber, and green, depending upon what where they are in the current illness. Once, obviously, as a part of the MDT, the next step would be then doing the advanced care planning. That what are their wishes, where they want to be cared for, where they prefer place of death is, what about resuscitation, so all those and what emergency treatment or ceiling of treatment they might need. So all that advanced care planning needs to happen once you have actually identified a patient. And once you have done advanced care planning, it is quite useful to share it electronically. If it's in your own notes, in your paper notes, or if it's in your GP systems, if you have not shared them as on your Coordinate My Care, which is the current platform which we use in London, then unfortunately these care plans, which you have done so much of work in terms of sharing the wishes, so getting the wishes of the patient and making decisions or crucial decisions for about treatment plans, it won't be able to be seen in the urgent care scenarios. So Coordinate My Care is something electronic care plan which we would advocate for you guys to actually use and and share. Also, oh, I will talk about Coordinate My Care in next few slides. But one thing which, as Jyoti said, that I need to make sure that our local teams, the Northeast London teams, actually aware that what local resources we have and support for the health professionals to actually help the learning disability patients when you're actually trying to deliver the end of life care. So we could use our learning disability or mental health teams if needed, because they are the ones who are actually are much more involved with the individuals, and they might know them better, how they communicate, what information, in what way they actually like their information to be given to them. And they might be the one who might be able to come with the patient either face to face or on the video, where you can discuss these matters. So we make use of learning disability teams or the mental health teams. You can use your integrated case management teams, the ICM teams, and which has got your social worker. You have your and the LD team can be part of the learning disability team, can be part of these teams. District nurses, matrons, and some of the places can hospice nurses can be invited as well for these meetings. We do have in a lot of areas frailty MDTs, where your geriatricians from the hospital trust would be able to actually guide you through for these complex decision making if the need be. We have end of life facilitators in most of the boroughs, and you can actually make use of these facilitators to help you to provide the best care for these patients. We can get palliative care consultant advice from the hospice or from the hospital. And most importantly, early referral to community or hospice palliative care team will help to actually deliver the best service for these patients. So coming on to the Coordinate My Care. Coordinate My Care is a universal care planning platform to record and share any urgent, important information about our patients. It's accessible to all health and social care colleagues and can be created by any health professionals and can be updated by any health professionals and by our patients as well. So our patients can actually initiate my CMC, their own wishes and care and plans, and then ask the health professionals to approve. The largest view of this kind of a care plan are from LAS and 111. So that's quite important when they are out of hours, when the emergency services approached by these individuals or by the carers of these individuals, that they know what is the treatment plans are, what are the wishes of the individuals are. Uh, I just wanted to tell you some top tips about when discussing CMC or Coordinate My Care with the patients, because sometimes it might be difficult for them to understand why we want to share their medical decision making or the treatment plans with out of hours or any other individuals. That we could tell them that actually it reduces the worry for them to have to remember their medical conditions and medications. If you have a CMC care plans, you'll be prioritized by 111 and LAS. Everyone will be offered an opportunity to document their wishes and preferences regarding their future care. It's a supportive care plan, an urgent care plan, future care plan offered to all patients versus the advanced care or end-of-life care plan. It's not just end-of-life plan, it can be used for many other patients. And we do not have to discuss all the mandatory fields. For example, the preferred place of death may not be appropriate or relevant. So you can select not yet discuss or simply explain why, and you can still publish or approve a care plan if you have selected not yet discussed. The opportunities we have to actually discuss the advanced care planning and any future planning is actually when if the patient has had a recent admission or a contact with emergency services. You could invite them, ask them about that event or that incident, but also plan for any future expected emergency service involvement. Or if they have got any change in their usual presentation, they might have generally declined from their baseline, or there might be a change in place of care needs, or treatment plan from the secondary care or the hospital consultant. Even especially if you're referring your patient to any other provider, and this is a complex care, and you're referring to hospice, district nursing, it's good to have that CMC plan or care plans that can be shared across to deliver the best care. And sometimes it's opportunistic that the patient is well. It would be good time to discuss how to keep them well with a clear future planning if and when things change. And I just wanted to go through some of the stats just to make sure that everybody is aware that there are lots and lots of care plan being created over the last couple of years. This is the London-wide data, and in BHR we only had CMC for just over a year, and we are doing really well. Havering and Redbridge has been creating lots of plans, and Barking and Dagenham is catching up. We, as you can see, all these care plans across London, and you can see the Northeast London is creating more and more as the time goes along. And most importantly, these care plans are getting viewed. So you can see these are the views by the urgent care services in the last few months. And that's how, if the urgent care services know what are the wishes of the patients are, what are the treatment plans are, they might be able to fulfill the wishes and adhere to what the patient wants and deliver the best care. I would stop there. I could take questions now, or maybe after Dr. Mijli is finished. Is up to Jyoti.
I think Amit, yeah, Amit, is it okay if we just move on with the presentation and then we can ask the question?
Yeah, sure.
Is that be all right? Thank you. Thanks, Amit.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. So let me stop the share 1 sec.
And if people do have questions, just to feel free to use a chat function, or you can ask at the end as well. Thanks, Karina. I'll just pass it on to you. Bola, are you doing, or Karina, are you doing your own slides? Yeah, fine.
Hi, everybody. I think, can you all hear me?
Yeah, that's fine, Karina.
That's
Loud
great.
and clear. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for asking me to come today. I'll start by saying that I have got a special interest. I think many people involved with supporting people with learning disability do have sort of personal reasons why they would be involved. Why would they want to be involved? So I've got some very close friends who've got young adults in their families with learning disability. So it's an area of life that really matters to me personally. But it's also very important, I think, within palliative care to really think through what are the similarities and differences for this particular group of people. So the focus of the talk that I'm going to give is around resuscitation status, but I've also got a little bit at the end more generally about palliative care for people with learning disability from my perspective. So the context of the sort of current times is very helpfully sort of laid out in the Learning Disability Mortality Review Programme outputs. Now, this mortality review programme was set up in 2015 because people with learning disability were dying much earlier than the general population and much earlier than they should. And they were found often in terms of bereavement stories to have been subject to misdiagnoses, late diagnoses and poor care. So from 2016 on, the group of people who analyse the deaths of people with learning disability attempt to analyse every death of people with learning disability in the country. So what they put out in their annual reviews is a very rich account of the national experience. So I've just sort of put up some highlights from the last published annual review, which was in 2019. On the left, I've put some of the descriptors that you'll find in the annual reviews, a reminder of the individual personalities and lives of the people whose deaths we're now reviewing, to really sort of personalise the stories that are summarised. And you can see that more than 7,000 deaths were reported to the leader team in 2019. Over 500 were children. And the review takes an awful lot of time because each death is taken very seriously, and all contexts around that person's death are contacted, the clinical notes are read and so on and so forth. So by the end of the year, by publication of the 2019 report, there had been a thorough review of 45% of those cases. The majority of deaths were in hospital. I've put the highlight, the kind of commonest causes, which were diseases of respiratory or the circulatory system, rather than cancer, for example. Some of them, a third of them, were deemed treatable against 8% of the general population when deaths are analysed. And DNA CPR orders were common in the deaths and commonly appropriate, but sometimes not appropriate. There was really, really good care identified, but there was also some very poor care identified. And that's what the leader team do for us, is they put out learning from mortality reviews. So some of what follows comes from that. So in terms of specifically resuscitation decisions, there are some ground rules. So ground rule 1 is there is case law. So the sort of general case law is set by the Tracy ruling in 2014 and the Winspear ruling in 2015. So many of you will be familiar with these, but just briefly to say, Janet Tracy was a person who did not have learning disability. She had full mental capacity, and she was somebody who always wanted to be involved in decisions about herself. She was very involved in her health care, including her diagnosis of advanced lung cancer. But then she had a car accident. She ended up in Addenbrooke's ITU, and a DNA CPR order was placed on her without discussion with her. And she only learned about that a few days in, as did her family, just a sort of chance spotting of it. So she contested the DNA CPR order and that it hadn't been discussed with her. In fact, it was discussed then, and it was reverted because she was getting better from her car accident. She did die a few weeks later of her advanced lung cancer with a DNA CPR order in place with her permission and her discussion. But it was the fact that it hadn't been discussed with her when she was somebody who wanted things discussed with her that was important. And so her family took Addenbrooke's to court over that, and she won. Carl Winspear was a young man. He was 28 when he died, and he had learning disability along with cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and some other medical problems. What happened to him was he was admitted with respiratory problems. He was poorly, and in the middle of the night, at 3 o'clock in the morning, the registrar put up a DNA CPR order. The challenge from his mum, who was his delegated voice, when she came in the next day and found this out, was that she should have been rung. That should have been discussed with her, and it wasn't. He went on to die quite shortly after, but nevertheless, the case law was set by the challenges in that case to a hospital in Sunderland. And so what we have in case law is that you must involve your patient in discussion about CPR status unless they do not have capacity, or they don't want to discuss, they prefer to delegate the discussion, or if the discussion will cause overwhelming distress, but it really has to be overwhelming. We really should be talking about resuscitation status with people when they have capacity. If they don't want to talk about it, and if they say, no, this is not what I want to talk about, seek permission to talk with a key family member so that you can explain to people where things are at with regard to resuscitation status. If somebody does not have capacity, you must consult their advocate, and that's the Winspear ruling. In other words, the sort of nothing about me without me decision-making. And there's the document from the King's Fund from, I think, about 2011, which first coined that phrase, nothing about me without me. Ground rule 2, is that learning disability is not a reason for a DNA CPR order. People with learning disabilities should not be for DNA CPR just because of the learning disability. Now that's recently been flagged again, both by an NHS England report in March 2021 and a CQC report that came out at just about the same time. The CQC report highlights the inappropriateness of blanket rulings for example, a residential care home setting. DNA CPR orders should never be sort of handed out to, for example, the care home. They have to be decided on an individual basis. But also they highlighted forms that have been written right up to the present day and in very local trusts to us, where the cause of the reason for a DNA CPR order was learning disability. That should never be. I'm going to share a few cases because I do realise that it is challenging to talk about resuscitation with people with a learning disability, and it's also challenging to talk about about resuscitation with people who are supporting and advocating people with a learning disability when they haven't got the ability to understand the discussion. So the two people pictured are Yolanda on the left, that's mum, and Floortje on the right, who's a 20-year-old woman. So she's a young woman with lifelong chromosomal disorder, meaning that she needs all care. She's got no understanding of discussions around healthcare, but she is, when she's well, is a bright and bonny member of a family who love her very much. She's had a lot of ins and outs of hospital in her life, so she's very familiar with hospitals. And she was admitted for a healthcare crisis last year. It's one that she'd had before. It wasn't an unfamiliar healthcare crisis, but she was in hospital nevertheless. She needed to spend a period of time post-operatively in intensive care. And the question posed to her mother as she entered the doors of ITU is, should we or shouldn't we resuscitate your daughter? Now that is, the mother describes, the story is taken from a website, which is why I can be so sort of clear about who this person is and put a name to her rather than making it all confidential. So this is out on the web. The mother describes what it feels like to hear the question, do you want, should we or shouldn't we resuscitate your daughter? It's such a challenging question. What rushes through a mother's mind at that time, or Yolanda's mind, is she going to die now? Am I underestimating the situation? Is this worse than what I've gone through before with Floortje? Is there something different this time? So Yolanda describes what it feels like to witness that question. It made her stop and think, I don't think she's going to die, but is there something happening now? And so when she challenges the ITU consultant or the doctor says, I don't think she is going to die, but when your daughter goes to the intensive care unit, this is a standard question. And what Yolanda then reminds us of is, as her mum, this is not a standard question for me. I listened to Yolanda telling her story about what it felt like to be asked, should we or shouldn't we resuscitate your daughter? And I found myself wondering, I've got a son who's 22. Would I be asked the same question if he post-operatively went into ITU? Would it be put the same way? Now, my son doesn't have the health difficulties that Floortje has, but my understanding of the story is that there was nothing different about Floortje, and yet the question was asked. The challenge to mum was that there was no context to the question. She wasn't given any information about what CPR meant, what the likelihood of success might be, what success means. It's a shortcut question that doesn't clarify how much can be done and what can't be done for someone like Floortje. She, as the mum, is left with the uncertainty. Are they going to do everything for her except for resuscitation? What does that mean? So putting a question as bluntly as should we or shouldn't we resuscitate your daughter is really difficult for the mother in that scenario. And I've just sort of printed that out for people who prefer to read afterwards when you get the slides. The next cases are cases that I've either been involved with or been near to. So that I've changed some of the details, but the thrust is there. So the first case is of a young man who has severe learning disability. He's fully dependent, he is almost non-vocal, and he lives in a residential home. In recent months, due to COVID, he's been unable to attend his college, which he'd really enjoyed, and that's where he got his social contact. All that has stopped during COVID, as have the visits from his parents. I mean, they've resumed now, but at the time of writing, the visits were all stopped. So he's really only got his carers as his social contact. From the beginning of lockdown, the first lockdown last year, Mr. A became quieter, more withdrawn. He began to lose weight. He was unsettled. He has a rig because he can't manage oral food and fluids, and he started pulling it out when he was unsettled. The care team were worried that possibly there was a pain element that would make him more unsettled, maybe an emotional element. But the upshot of him pulling out his rigs is that he kept on being hospitalized, and when he got into hospital, he was found to have pneumonia. At the first hospital discharge, he was referred to palliative care for pain management. So that's when we first got to hear about him. What we found was that he was on very little analgesia. We didn't feel that we knew him well enough to be stepping in front of the GP who knew him really, really well and was very, very supportive. We were reluctant to put him on strong opioids without really talking about that with the GP. And in fact, the GP took him away from us in a sense, because he realized that actually what this young man needed was some orthotics review, physiotherapy, reappraisal, and so on. But then followed 2 more hospitalizations. And in fact, after the 3rd one, he was referred to palliative care at discharge from the hospital team to continue advanced care planning discussions. At that stage, he was for CPR. What we learned afterwards was that that resuscitation status was there after a call to his mother from somebody in the hospital, a senior in the hospital. And the question that the senior posed to mum was, do you want your son to be for resuscitation? And her answer was yes. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you the end of the story until the end of the slides, but just to give you a couple more cases. So another case that I was involved with, a middle-aged woman with advanced ovarian cancer this time. Now, this woman had moderate learning disability and was able to voice thoughts and decisions and to be party to discussions, at least to a certain extent. She wanted to live, she knew about her cancer, she knew it was advanced, she wanted to live as long as possible. But in the context of my meeting with her, her disease was very advanced. She was very frail, she was bedbound, and chemotherapy had stopped. She still had a full CPR order on her, because when she was asked, do you want to be for CPR? She said yes. So that was the setting, that was the scenario. The next case, there's 2 more cases. The next case is of another young woman, 43 years. This woman has got cerebral palsy. She's quadriplegic. She has moderate learning disability, and she was admitted to hospital with pain. Pain has been a chronic issue for her, and it worsens with infection. So that, not surprisingly, she was found to have an infection, which was treated with IV antibiotics. She went back home about a week later, where she lives in a residential home. She felt better. She was much brighter. She was comfortable. She had a DNA CPR form. What the residential home care manager and her learning disability care lead realised was she had not been asked about resuscitation at all, nor had anyone that they knew of. When they rang around her family, one family member had been consulted. The family member was actually in the medical profession and had just been asked, doctor to doctor, do you think that she should be for resuscitation? We think not. So the family member had acceded, but he'd actually felt a bit uncomfortable with the discussion, didn't really want to go against medical advice. So the status was queried by the residential home staff and the learning disability nurse specialist. Why is she DNA CPR? And when they got back to the hospital and discussed with the physician who'd had the conversation, who'd signed the form, what they realised was that the doctor had no understanding of her norm, how active, lively, sociable she was, albeit needing assistance. But this is a woman who had a rich life and who hadn't been dipping recently. So the CPR, DNA CPR order, in other words, was put on her without any understanding of the context of her. So the question in everybody's minds then was, would they have done this for somebody with similar disabilities but without learning disability? And the doctor did accept that the decision had been made from the end of the bed and without understanding of her and her quality of life, and did also accept that in fact the health crisis which had hospitalized her had actually got better. And the 4th case is of a young woman with a chromosomal disorder, which was identified in early childhood, which is a slowly progressive condition. At least the output of the disorders itself means that she will slowly decline over time, slowly but surely decline. I meet her at a point when she's needing carers or care 24/7. She will gradually worsen despite best care, but she's had fantastic care up to now. She has severe learning disability and is not able to comprehend even the simplest of discussions and decisions. Her issue is that she has periodic respiratory crises and she can become very unwell, but the family are resistant to a DNA CPR status as she's recently come out of a respiratory crisis. She's home now, and they are really fearful that she won't be actively treated if she has a DNA CPR status. They've actually experienced the board on the wall in the ward with dots indicating who is DNA CPR, and they're just very nervous of her not getting the best treatment. So she's currently for CPR. They want to keep the full CPR status, recognizing that she's disabled, but feeling that she's not critically ill at the moment, and that if she suddenly worsened, they wanted to have every chance. So these are sort of difficult cases, difficult challenges for people with learning disability to understand and weigh up pros and cons, outcomes and otherwise, for people who are supporting people with learning disability, and for people trying to have a conversation about CPR. However, the key thing is we mustn't avoid the conversation when we're worried that people would have a poor outcome from CPR, or when there's the opportunity to explore choices and hopes for future care, especially around end of life and what's important for the person. So ground rule 3 is recognise futility. If it's not going to work, you need to say so, and recognise the need to prepare for best quality, not only in life, but also at end of life. So that these are my prompts. If your individual in front of you has progressive advancing disease such that any resuscitation attempt would now not have any likelihood of success, it is so important as a clinician to say that. If you're not sure whether that's the case or not, go to the doctors who know this person well. Go to the people who've been looking after them for years. Explore. Have an MDT discussion. People with advanced disease should be protected from futile interventions as much as they should be given best care with interventions that might work. The focus should be on what can help this person at this time and what choices for the future, what matters to them now into the future, rather than avoiding talks about the future because they're difficult. Ultimately, when people die, their heart does eventually stop. Usually, in advanced disease, for example, with cancer, the heart will stop as the very last thing that happens at the end point of natural dying, at which point a CPR attempt would be hugely disruptive and would absolutely fail. So looking at the patient in their healthcare context is really important. Just to share the outcomes of the people that I described before. So Mr. A, who was the young man who kept on pulling out his peg and kept on going into hospital with respiratory crises, he required a best interest meeting with mum, with others involved in his care and others able to advocate for him, and an honest discussion about what would might help in a crisis and what really wouldn't now. He was enormously frail, and the outcome of that really thorough best interest discussion was he should not be for resuscitation now. All focus is on treating his joints, which is his big issue, his rehabilitation as much as is possible, good nourishment and social quality time, and that is where he's at now, and mum is okay with that. It wasn't actually ultimately her decision, it was really a medical decision once we understood the context. The the middle-aged woman, I should say, who had advanced ovarian cancer and was very frail and bedbound, the challenge really here was that she didn't understand the concept of something not working. She found it very difficult that the oncologists were no longer treating her, but she could no longer see them. They weren't at home with her. So to a certain extent, she was able to move on from that. But she kept on being asked about resuscitation status, and she simply couldn't grasp that it wouldn't work, whereas her family wholly accepted that. And they were very relieved in the end when the decision was sort of a shared decision where they were able to put forward their worries about the futility of a CPR attempt. And she was given a DNA CPR status on medical best interest grounds, the focus being now comfort and family time staying at home. In fact, she went on to die peacefully at home. Mrs. C, who was the lady who went in with an acute infection, who then got much better, her DNA CPR, not surprisingly, was reappraised and reversed. She's currently for CPR. And Miss D, who is the young woman with the chromosomal disorders, who is gradually changing, but has emerged from her last hospitalization. The family are in the process of thinking about all sorts of things, including a MyCMC record, and she is currently for CPR while they go through that process. So just to, the last few slides are all about learning resources. The story of Yolanda and Florcia came from the Palliative Care for People with Learning Disabilities Network, who put out a fantastic set of webinars all about supporting people with learning disability in advanced illness. And so their stories came directly from a podcast. If you Google pcpld.org, it's easy to find the webinars and podcasts. I've just arrowed it for your ease. And they're very nice podcasts where you hear the voice of people with learning disability, the voice of people who worry about them, and the voice of professionals talking about them. And there's a really excellent webinar on DNA CPR, which was run in April this year. There's many other resources. This one I think is worthy of a journal club. If you do journal clubs in your settings, it's an excellent resource issued by a learning disabilities charity called Turning Point, and it talks people through the whole DNA CPR challenge, really with the aim to explain that sometimes it's not the right thing to have resuscitation, but also how to empower people with learning disability and their support to ask the right questions about CPR. And the CQC have recently published their report that I mentioned earlier on, but they've also published an easy read to make it a little bit more understandable for people who are not used to reading heavy Care Quality Commission reports. I've bullet pointed the key recommendations from their reports. I've mentioned the blanket policy is no, you can't write a DNA CPR policy, form on grounds of LD, but don't make assumptions about quality of life. You need to find out who the person is and what gives them quality and so on. And it does remind that actually don't lay the person open to futile treatments at the expense of quality of life around dying. Talk about futility of CPR. It's important to be honest. So my sort of summary points are: when CPR wouldn't work, the issue is one of breaking bad news, not of consent, because that's a medical decision. Beware of discussing CPR and DNA CPR if there isn't a life-limiting condition in front of you, because the danger is of bias creeping in. And any medical best interest discussion and decision should include key family members. And finally, in response to our person D, our 28-year-old parents' worries, DNA CPR should apply only to cardiopulmonary arrest and not to any other treatment on offer. And you can see that illustrated in the CMC sort of emergency treatment plan page. It the second one down should be still fully possible, even if CPR would not work. So just because you're not CPR doesn't mean you can't have other treatments. Each one needs to be discussed on a case-by-case basis. My last slide is one about referring to palliative care and where do specialist palliative care people fit in. I'm only talking from my local perspective. I know there are people from Inner East London, but I can't think it wouldn't apply to Inner East London services too. As far as we're concerned, we would urge people to have a low threshold to refer to palliative care. We would make all efforts to do early face-to-face, because we've learned that unless we see the person and their vulnerabilities, it's quite difficult on the phone to advise support. We really need to involve the person and those who love them. So we're very mindful of that. So we really want to seek out early on, who is the key worker here? Who do we connect with? We inevitably have to dip in and dip out because we've got very heavy caseloads, but sometimes ongoing consistent face-to-face is needed. And we have found the CMC record absolutely invaluable. I can think of one young man who, he was in his 30s, I think, who we supported fairly recently with a terminal diagnosis of chronic renal failure, who lived in residential accommodation and had a very concerned and loving sister who sort of looked out for him all of his life. And she was so worried whenever anything happened that the response ultimately was 111 or 999. So the paramedics got to know this young man very well, and we were constantly having to revisit, reflect on, refine the care plan for him so that we could create sort of sensible plans for his diabetes, his well, what if he didn't eat, what if he didn't drink, and so on. But actually he didn't go back into hospital in the 4 months that we knew him. We were able to steady the ship by regularly talking to each other and responding to crisis call outs and sort of thinking about what have we learned with that call out. And the sister was with us all the way, as were the residential care home staff. We've really identified, by reflecting on our involvement with people with learning disability, that the confidence of carers is really critical. In particular for people supporting people with learning disability, even the step of trying paracetamol can feel quite a big step, particularly if the person with learning disability is not really receptive to medicines. So we've just learned that carers often need much more support, and also that often the carer is not a healthcare worker, and end-of-life care and confronting the fact that the person they're caring for is going to die is really as difficult for them as it would be for any family member. So low threshold to share, ask anytime. We've got an advice line that we encourage people to have and to use. And we're learning all the time. And I think some of the people in the audience today are from some of the connects that we're making with people who are supporting people with learning disability all the time. We really realise that we don't know enough about learning disability and the support network out there. And we've learned that our learning disability colleagues don't know enough about how to get into in through the front door of palliative care services. So the more we work together, the better we'll support each other and we'll use each other. And finally, the bit we haven't talked about today, but bereavement, which needs time, imagination and support, so that people who've lost people with learning disability to death and people who remain behind, their often friends are left behind who have learning disability. There needs to be time to remember, appreciate and celebrate the life of the person who's died, and a reminder to support and recognise the support needs of the people left behind. So that is the end of all of that, quite heavy stuff for everybody. I'll stop sharing and see where we're at with questions.
Thanks, Karina. That was absolutely brilliant. I think the key theme that's running through the presentations that CMC, I know Amit's quite keen. It's really good to see those figures, Amit. but it's something we may have to come back and do some more work on. But I'm going to open it to the floor now. I can't see any questions in the chat function, so if you want to put your hands up or speak. I can see lots of familiar faces, so I don't know whether I need to ask anything or anyone got any questions. Amrish?
No, thanks, Jyoti. Thanks for all the presentations. Really quite thought-provoking and giving a lot of insight into learning disability and looking after people with LDs.
Thanks, Amrish.
And making decisions for them or on their behalf.
Thanks, Amrish. I think one of the things, Amit, we need to just have a chat, as Karina was saying, was just to look at how we can use the community learning disability teams and the palliative care nurses with the GPs to form that MDT group towards the end of life. I think that actually that wraparound support would really be useful. And that is that cross-sector kind of working.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned about, especially in BHR, we know that we have ICM teams. So if your patients who has got the integrated care team or case management, and you can invite, if you have a LD patient or any patients whom you think that you need more support to make a medical decision or any decision for DNR or anything like that, you can ask the hospice team, maybe a nurse, maybe consultant invite, can go to the hospice, can go to the LD team, as well as the mental health team, because the more we get more support from everybody, because as Corina said, we need to know the people who know the patient better. So it may be a patient, patient carer or family member, and then make a joint decision as a multidisciplinary team. That might actually would be helpful for everybody. And actually decision making shouldn't be a burden to one individual as a clinician. It should be sort of shared across, and that would give the best outcome for our patient.
Absolutely. I mean, I've just got a couple more minutes, and I'm going to ask if anyone's got any more questions. You're going to hate me for being your friends, but Anju, Homera, so all the people I know, all my friends here, pick on now.
Hello. Hi, it's Nicola Carter. Hello, everyone. I'm a community learning disability nurse from the Havering team. Sorry, can you see me? Thank you so much. That was such a brilliant presentation from all of you. I just wanted to come in and say hello and thank you. Also, just to remind GPs that the LD nurses, the LD team are here. If you've got concerns with anyone, if they're not known to us, do contact us. You can contact us on our duty numbers. You can refer into us. And like you say, Amit, we will support wherever we can. In terms of sort of mental capacity, any best interest decision making, even just understanding maybe a condition that somebody's been just been diagnosed, we can support there, and do contact your local team. Within Havering, I don't know how many GPs are here from Havering, but LD nurses are actually linked to each of the groups. I'm sorry, you keep changing what you're called. I'm not sure you were cohorts, or I'm not sure what you are now, but
PCNs,
I think the PCNs.
That's it. So we've got 2 nurses per area. So actually anything to do with LD, you've got any concerns about, please do contact us. That's what we're here for, and we're always willing to come out and support. And we link in with everybody. Yes, we've got the liaison nurses also, LD liaison nurses within the HRUT, so across King George's and Queen's Hospital, and we're linking with that team, and they link in with us. So we are trying to work together, and I know Karina and I, we've met a few times. We're trying to get the end of life LD pathway more sort of focused and succinct across NELFT as well, so we can all work in together. So that was it really. Just
Nicola, thank you ever so much for coming and introducing yourself. That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Amit, can I leave you with this question? There is one question in the chat.
That's fine.
Just need to shoot off for another meeting, but would I be able to leave you and Karina just in case anybody else has got any questions?
Sure.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thanks, Jyoti. So I think the question in the chat is Dr. Hassan. By the way, hello, Dr. Hassan. Long time no see. Probably we'll meet when things are better. What you're saying is that who is responsible for referring to patients for palliative care if they're discharged from the hospital? So it could be the hospital team at the time of discharge. If they haven't done it, it could be that the patient actually contacts the general practitioners or GP surgery, and the GP surgery can do it. It could be a GP, a GP practice nurse, or a PCN staff. It could be any clinician, or it could be that the patient is under the district nurses, and the district nurses have gone in to see them, and they think that they need more specialist input. They can be referred to the hospice specialist team. Regarding the district nurses in BND and BHR mainly, actually more in Barking and Dagenham and Havering, they are our actually the outreach, you can say, the hands-on people for palliative care. So they are the ones who are actually having more face-to-face and a direct contact with the patient. So yes, district nurses could do doesn't have to take the referral from you. They can just carry on doing their further service and extend that from that usual district nursing service to a palliative care service. And if they need support, the hospice is always there.
Can I just add
that
the danger is that nobody steps forward because everybody thinks that somebody else will step forward. So I think I'm sure you will all read your hospital discharge summaries really carefully. They're trying to get them out in a more timely fashion. And I think if you are reading a summary and you can see that there is a progressive issue here and the person's coming out, they've emerged from hospital, they're still alive, but they're more vulnerable than they were. Then I think you should be asking the question as the receiving GP, I wonder if this person's been referred to palliative care. If they have been, the electronic discharge summaries do usually, touch wood, say so. If you don't see that on the electronic discharge summary, but you think, I wonder if they should, why not ring up the family or the care home where they're at, wherever the setting, and ask, were they referred to palliative care? Because it sounds like they've had a rough time. Is that something we might need now? So I think do feel that you can step forward and ask that question. The other thing just to say is that, if they're in a nursing home, they won't be linked to district nurses. That's only for residential homes and people living at home. So I think the danger is not referring because you think somebody else has. If you think they sound palliative, do step forward and ask the question and then refer.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Karina. There is another question which was posed. It says, we did have this problem for who should refer. So
Yes.
like you've kind of met that. So if people are not sure, please, speak to the family, speak to professionals rather than assuming that someone else will take responsibility for doing the referral.
It's basically anyone can refer, but obviously having a bit of health information around the referral is really helpful.
So I don't need to swap anything. My laptop's a new one, isn't it? And it's got the new NEL.
Bear with me, please. I just need to mute. Yeah. Okay.
That's okay.
Okay. Yes. So sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Karina.
No, that's it. That's it. Really, is anyone is able to refer to specialist palliative care services. Obviously, it's really important that we have the information. So sometimes you'll find that we're responding back saying, "Can you just tell us a bit more?" But increasingly, we've got access to ELPR and ePro and so on. So that is making a big difference. Knowing about the background and the context is really important. But yeah, please refer if you are worried about the person. Don't assume. In terms of PELC forms, I think somebody's asking about PELC forms. I think, Amit, that CMC has taken over PELC forms now. PELC forms don't really exist anymore, do they? No, so you don't need to do.
No. So if you can do CMC form, a CMC coordinate my care electronic care plan, you don't have to inform PELC of with the form which we used to fill in. But it's still good practice to do the paper copy of the DNR form. So if you, so obviously you do your CMC, you do all electronic DNR decision making, whatever you have to do on the care plans, but then also ask the family to actually get the hard copy of the DNR and keep it at home, so that just in case the IT system doesn't work on the day when they had the emergency, at least they have got the hard copy at home as well. So the hard copy of the DNR form but you don't need the PELC form.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of to make it a little bit easier for GPs, because I know it takes a bit of time to write out the hard copy. If you've done a good, a proper DNA CPR page entry on CMC, there is a facility whereby you can just print it. So it saves you just double writing. If you've done your CMC record, if you look on the top left-hand side of a record that you're going to update, there is a print ability. So you just print out that form and the family can pick up the printed out form. It just saves a bit of double writing. And that form doesn't actually need to be signed, because the fact that you've written it in the CMC record allows there to be a sort of electronic trace that you did write that and you did sign it. So it's just, sometimes it's just good to find little shortcuts that save a bit of time.
And absolutely, and that actually will also help for patients who haven't got a family to collect the form. So if you have done the form, the CMC care plan, the district nurses, if they're going in, they can actually print and take it with them. So that's another way of providing that hard copy to the patient.
Yeah, I think you just would need to ask the district nurses, could they do that? But I'm sure they would.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't think we have got any other questions in the chat or anybody. But thanks for having us, me and Karina. But we can come back if there is any learning need, if any burning questions, you can email it to us or Jyoti. And yeah, thank you everyone. And it's recorded as well, so you can actually view it. And these slides will be sent to you on your email as suggested earlier. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hamitek. Thank you, Dr. Karina and Dr. Jyoti for today's session. Like I said earlier, for those who are using their iPhone, please, 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 you need to put your email address in the chat box so I know who you are, so we can send the presentation to you and you can have access to the recording of this webinar. So if you haven't, please kindly do that. Again, all I would just want to say is a big thank you to all our presenters for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.